Hey,
Hi, right.
hello
we're back.
again. It's us. Critical decolonial social psychology. We had a class this morning.
Yes, so we discussed Fanon's Black Skin, White Masks, focusing specifically on chapter 1, which is called the Negro and Language. Extremely important chapter, I think.
Yeah.
Not just in the development of Fanon's own thought, but for our context.
And the students got into it. We had them write reflections.
Yeah.
The reflections, we read a bit of the reflections. They're great about what Fanon is saying about their own thinking process while they were reading this. So it was a good class, I think.
And I think, I just said to you, I mean, it's interesting that we went in, we didn't think about this beforehand, but we went in teaching this seminar in English. Neither of us are first language English speakers, and we didn't really think, now I think about it, that all these students also have different relationships with English. Not all of them are English speaking, but quite a few when we ask people.
The interesting thing is, we're teaching this in a historically Afrikaans university. Fanon is writing about French. I suppose, and somebody who is teaching this or reading this in France or in Martinique would have a different relationship to the chapter. But it's still quite interesting that the relationship I have with English and that you have with English, reading a text written in French about language is mighty interesting.
Yeah, and then as we started discussing with students, we also realized that they have different relationships with not just English, but with their so-called mother tongues.
Yes.
Not everyone speaks the tongue of their mother. We had a student who said
that she doesn't speak
she can
her mother's
understand but
tongue.
doesn't speak her mother's tongue.
Yeah. We had a student who's Norwegian, or at least has some Norwegian roots.
The student who speaks Mandarin only to her mother, so that's an interesting, the opposite.
And throws in a Mandarin word here and there with friends.
Then students who are Afrikaans speaking, who comments on the fact that Afrikaans also, of course, a very racialized language during the 20th century, and that even today in her school education, that Afrikaans is taught, you always, it's similar, she resonated with Fanon, that the Afrikaans you speak is not the correct one.
Oh, that was a good point to as part of what students were asking us and the comments they were making, and there were several of those about their relationship to English. We didn't have a student speaking about their relationship to Afrikaans. Probably it'll come up. Oh no, we had that student, but we didn't have white students speaking about their relationship to Afrikaans. So and one of the questions, a comment or a question the student asked was why can't we all just speak English? Because this is a common comment and view about language.
And I think that comment is not based on the idea that we should all adopt the same identity, but that English is somehow neutral as an instrument.
And people call it a business language. They say it's a lingua franca. Even the state in South Africa uses that. Like English is a lingua franca. Let's get on with it.
And I think that was interesting because it raised the issue then of identity. To what extent is language important for them as part of their identity, for example, or to what extent is it important to develop indigenous languages for other forms of empowerment?
But the question of language and power, language and identity and power is a really central one, because the more we spoke with students, the more I realized that maybe they haven't thought about it. They can see it, but they haven't quite analyzed that languages are not neutral, that there's always a hierarchy. But even within the languages, that's the way you speak, the dialects versus the standard English, and then of course you started speaking about the codification of African languages by apartheid ideologues.
Yeah, and I think that point about that, even if you should adopt one language, that wouldn't solve the problem, because within the language there's still a system of differences. The accent differences, the regional differences, ideas about what is correct and incorrect. So English itself, if you probably go to England, certain accents are less prestigious, right? And if you become like an important philosopher or something and you speak in one of the less prestigious accents, you have to work harder to prove that you're intelligent, I guess.
And the discussion took a wonderful turn when we started talking about movies, about how at a certain point in the development of Afrikaans, that there was money brought in to develop and to shore it up, as it were, but also to expand on it. And one of the things you can take from this is if you wanted to have a more the development of African languages is to make literature, to make films, to make art in them, which Afrikaans authorities and ideologues and leaders.
It's sort of two moments. In the first moment, in the early 20th century,
Right.
you had a kind of state support for Afrikaans, or at least a kind of public support. And now it's privatized, of course, after apartheid. But there's a lot of private funding, money that goes into arts festivals and TV channels and movies and stuff. So that also raises the issue, of course, of language development in relation to the state. Because nowadays, perhaps some of it happens, it's privatized, so it becomes commercially viable.
So but you still need the people who are really interested in language, or at least, if you will, culture and identity, to support the languages. And that's an interesting development in this country. The last point I wanted to talk about, we're going on, is about the psychology of language. The moment we started talking to students about what Fanon is saying about, a psychology of language in a colonial context, that became quite interesting.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the most incredible things in Fanon's text is the attention that he pays to that what we call a psychology of language. And again, it comes down to the importance of alienation, or that split being, or in powerful metaphor that he talks about the amputation of being, the difficulty to connect to yourself, or kind of cultural resources, I guess.
Yeah.
Which is something that we will continue to discuss as the module progresses. But I think that's
it for today.
That's it for today.
Yeah, see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.